recently, Microsoft just passed a major milestone with its 20th anniversary since the release of its original Xbox system, which marked the company's entry into the home console market. And to celebrate the occasion, I decided to modify one to bring this retro console into 2021. We'll be installing a mod chip, a modern SSD hard drive, and giving it the ability to output lossless digital video with the MakeMHz HDMI Mod Kit. All that and some more coming right up. Hey everyone, how's it going? My name is Tito and welcome to another episode of Retro Renew. As you no doubt have heard, Microsoft recently celebrated 20 years since the release of their original Xbox. So seeing as how I never actually owned an Xbox console before, I thought now might be a good time to start. So I went ahead and bought this, a late model 1.6 variant Xbox system. And because this is a Macho Nacho video, we're going to have to go all out and bring this console from the early 2000s into 2021. I'll be doing a whole bunch of mods to the system, but the one that I am most excited about is the MakeMHz HD HDMI kit. This provides a lossless digital output to your modern television in glorious high definition. Additionally, I'll be adding an OpenXenium Mod Chip, a 500GB SSD, and some other mods which I'll be getting into in just a moment. Now I have to start off by giving a huge shout out and thank you to Red Herring 32. He provided some much needed technical support during this entire modding process, especially when it came to the software side of things. So I really just have to extend my sincere thanks for all of the help. Anyway, if you enjoyed content like this, be sure to hit that like button and consider subscribing to the channel for plenty more retro gaming and modding videos just like this one. Alright, so in this video, I'm going to start off by showing you all of the mods and parts I'll be installing into my Xbox. Then I'll demonstrate how to put it all together and get it working, review all the features of the newly modded console, go over the pros and cons, and of course provide you with my overall thoughts. So going over the parts I'll be using, let's first start off with what I think is the most interesting, which is the MakeMHz HD HDMI mod. Like I stated previously, this is an internal HDMI mod that provides a full digital video signal. This particular one is for my 1.6 model Xbox, but MakeMHz has a kit available for all Xbox revisions. Inside the box, the first thing we have is the custom PCB, which features a full-size HDMI port. Next is a flex ribbon cable, which taps the console's digital video signal. These have become synonymous with all the HDMI mods I have covered on this channel. Next, in order to fully utilize all the features of this kit, we'll need to install the OpenXenium Mod Chip, which will also provide other useful functionality. And because I have the 1.6 revision of the console, we'll need to rebuild the LPC using this custom quick solder board. And the last few items in the kit are some wires, a couple 3D printed items and screws, and a really cool custom sticker that we'll put on the bottom of the console to indicate it was modded with this HDMI kit. Next, we'll be installing this 500GB SATA SSD, which will give much more storage than the original IDE hard drive currently in the system. And in order to get the SSD to work with the console, we'll need this IDE to SATA converter board, as well as this custom 22-inch 80-wire IDE cable to replace the original 40-wire one. Additionally, I bought this 2.5 to 3.5 inch hard drive adapter so we can properly install the 2.5 inch SSD into the hard drive caddy in the Xbox, which was originally designed for a 3.5 inch hard drive. Now the next thing I wanted to upgrade was the fan. One thing I noticed immediately when I first turned the system on after I got it was that the fan was definitely fairly audible. So I decided to quiet things down with this Nexus 70mm case fan. And in order to install it, I'll be using this 3D printed bracket, which was designed by Todd of Retro Frog. Todd makes a ton of great 3D printed items for retro consoles that are available for purchase on his website, which I'll have linked down below. Now something that you're going to also need is thermal paste, since we'll be removing the CPU and GPU heat sinks. I have this Cryonaut thermal paste from Thermal Grizzly, which I really like and use whenever I need to repaste a chip. Okay, so that is absolutely everything I'll be using for this project. Now let me show you how to put it all together. Okay, so we got a lot to cover here. First, we need to remove the motherboard so we can install the OpenXenium Mod Chip, which is necessary before we can even attempt to install the HDMI mod kit. Start by removing the 4 T20 Torx screws underneath the rubber feet and the 2 hidden underneath the labels. You can then lift the cover off. Remove the 2 T10 Torx screws on either side of the DVD drive, as well as the one hidden underneath the IDE cable. Then remove the IDE cable from the hard drive as well as the power cable. You can then lift out the hard drive caddy, as well as the caddy holding the DVD drive. Next, begin unplugging all the cables connected to the motherboard. And then unfasten all 11 T10 Torx screws securing the motherboard. You should now be able to carefully lift it out. Now locate the LPC header and go ahead and drop in the header pins included in the kit. Place a piece of tape over them to keep them in place while we solder them in. Because we're working on a 1.6 version of the Xbox, we need to solder in the LPC Rebuild QSB to restore some of the functionality that Microsoft removed in this revision. Solder each of the pins and ensure that you have solid joints. Then solder this point to the large ground plane. Then work your way around the QSB and make all the other connections. Once completed, it should look a little something like this. Next, install the OpenXenium Mod Chip onto the headers, leaving this pair of pins empty. And again, since this is a revision 1.6 Xbox, tin up these 2 pads and bridge them with a small piece of wire. Excellent, once completed, put the console back together and turn it on by pressing the eject button, and you should be greeted with the OpenXenium OS. From here, go to the network settings and write all the network information down, since we'll need to reference it in just a moment. Then, hop over to the MakeMHz GitHub webpage and download the kernel patch. You'll also need to source the BIOS for your version of the console, which you should be able to find online. Next, you'll want to open the application EV tool and select Unpack. Browse over to your BIOS file and hit Open. The BIOS is now unpacked and ready to be patched. It will show as a .img file. Open the software called Lunar IPS and hit the Apply IPS Patch button. Select the kernel patch file we downloaded from the MakeMHz GitHub page. It shows up as a .ips file. Now we're prompted to select the unpacked BIOS.img file we previously generated. It won't show up, so you will need to select all files in the drop-down menu. Now you'll see our .img file, so select it and press Open. Great, we now patched the BIOS, but we now need to pack it before we can flash it to our system. Go back to EV Tools and select the Pack button. Go ahead and select the patched.img file, and then you will need to select the original BIOS as the base ROM and hit Open. You will then be prompted to save the file. I added the word patch to my BIOS file name so that I can identify it later. Okay, now we need to transfer the new BIOS to our Xbox. Open your favorite FTP client, here I'm using FileZilla, and enter the IP address that we previously wrote down, and enter the username and password, which are both Xbox in lowercase. I'm connecting directly to my Xbox using an Ethernet cable that is connected to my PC. You should now see the file directory of the Xbox, and you can copy the BIOS to the C drive. I made a folder called BIOS and stuck it in there before copying it over. Once the transfer is complete, you can now go back to your Xbox console. Here, select Launch menu, then add a new item, and then select Flash. Navigate to the C drive, then find our BIOS folder and select our patched BIOS. You can rename it if you want, then select Done. Select any color, which I assume is for an optional LED mod, so it really doesn't matter what you choose here. Then press Set Default Item, and select our patched BIOS. Fantastic. Now go back to Settings, Xenium Settings, and then turn Instant Boot on. Alright, we now flashed our Xbox with the patched BIOS. Now let's continue modding the console by installing the SSD next. Remove the hard drive tray again, and unfasten all 4 T10 Torx bits securing the hard drive to the tray. With the hard drive removed, let's set up the SSD. Place the SSD into the 3.5-inch adapter and secure it with the included Phillips screws. And then attach the IDE to SATA converter board. And this is how the finished product should look. Go ahead and drop it into the caddy and secure it with the original screws. Next, we need to take our new 80-wire IDE cable and fold it exactly like the original 40-wire IDE cable it's replacing. This will help us route the new cable inside the console. Now, we can't reuse the old 40-wire IDE because it's not compatible with the SATA interface. This is why we are changing it to the 80-wire variant. Here you can see that I'm making sure I'm folding the wire exactly like the original. Fantastic. Now go ahead and install the SSD into the console like you would the old original hard drive. For this next part, we need to set up the new SSD and install the Unleash X dashboard. In order to do that, you need Hexen 2018 burned to a DVD. Insert that DVD into the Xbox and turn it on. Here you can see that our custom BIOS is loaded by the Evo X at the top part of the screen. And here you can see that Hexen detected our new SSD, so follow the on-screen prompts to set it up. When you get to this screen, you'll need to format the F drive partition. You do not want to skip this step, otherwise you will not be able to use all the additional space in your SSD. Once Hexen has finished installing the Unleash X dashboard, this is what your screen will look like. From here, you can now confirm if we have properly flashed our BIOS, allowing us to proceed with the HDMI install. Go to Xbox Admin, then File Explorer, and then C Drive. From here, select the folder Xbox HD, which I FTP'd over previously, and then select default.xbe. This will open the HD Plus menu, and here you can see that the kernel patch loader was detected, meaning our patch worked, and we can move on with the rest of the installation, which is just fantastic. Go ahead and take out the motherboard again from the Xbox. We're going to first remove the CPU and GPU heatsinks. For the GPU, unlatch the brace and then use a spudger to release the clip, and then it should come off. Then gently lift the heatsink off. For the GPU, I actually had to use 2 spudgers to pry off the clip, which was on there pretty tight. Now, the GPU heatsink is typically more difficult to remove, so it's recommended to heat it up to loosen the thermal compound. I'm using my hot air station set to about 100 degrees Celsius. When it cools down enough to grip it, gently wiggle the heatsink until it comes off. Don't use too much force or you risk damaging the board. Now use a thermal compound solvent to clean both the GPU and CPU. Then use some IPA to finish the job off. Next, carefully scrape the caked on thermal compound, making sure to not gouge the surface. Then clean off any remainder with a solvent and some IPA. Now with some flush cutters, carefully lift the 5 pegs securing the heatsink bracket. Take care to not cut the pegs accidentally. You just want to lift them up. And then pull them out all the way. You should now be able to remove the bracket. Next, we need to remove the AV port. I'll be using the hot air station to accomplish this. I covered all the nearby components with Kapton tape to prevent them from accidentally being removed. While heating up the area, I'm applying a gentle downward force on the connector. Eventually, I can pull it out and remove it. Here you can see I'm using some solder braid to now clean up the area. Next, we need to bridge a couple points together to trick the Xbox into thinking it has an HD AV cable plugged in. Here you can see the 2 connections I had to make. Now we need to prep the flex ribbon cable. It is recommended to pre-tin the tiny pads on the flex because we will be soldering it to a resistor array and not directly to a video chip like I've done on other HDMI mods. Next, very carefully align the pads on the flex cable with the resistor network shown here. I use some tape to help keep them in position. Then, very carefully, with an extremely small amount of solder on your iron tip, begin to make the connections. You really want to take your time doing this, and when you think you're done, be sure to use a multimeter to ensure that you made solid connections as well as avoided any potential bridging. And here is the final result. The last thing to do with the flex is to solder to this capacitor here. Next, we need to cut each of the wires included in the kit to the specific lengths specified in the GitHub instructions. Now go ahead and tin pin 1 and pin 6. Solder the orange wire to pin 6, which will provide our SPDIF digital audio signal. And solder the red wire to pin 5, which is for 5 volts of power. Solder this black wire to the ground leg of capacitor C3B1. Next, I tinned these legs of this chip next to the LPC headers and then soldered the paired wire strands to them. Now we need to remove everything from the bottom of the casing so we can install the HDMI port shroud. With everything removed, pop in the HDMI shroud. And then put everything back together. Now, let's prep the new fan by grabbing the RetroFrog 3D printed adapter and placing it on the fan like so, and then screw it on. Make sure the airflow matches the old fan we just removed. Then put it back into the console housing. Next, reinstall the heatsink bracket. And then reapply thermal paste to the GPU and CPU. Go ahead and drop in both heatsinks, but don't clamp them in just yet. With the motherboard back in the console housing, place the included 3D printed bracket as shown. Then put in the MakeMHz HDMI board on top, and go ahead and secure it with the 2 long T10 Torx screws included in the kit. Tin the pads on the PCB, then solder the orange wire to the SPDIF pad, the red wire to the 5-volt pad, and the black wire to the ground pad. On the other side of the board, solder both the SCL and SDA wires from the PIC16 chip, and then insert the flex into the ZIF connector. Then let's turn on the Xbox and make sure everything is working. Fantastic, we get a crystal clear picture. Let's quickly navigate back to the MakeMHz HD Plus menu to see if it detects the mod. And as you can see, it absolutely does, and everything is working perfectly. Now, let's wrap things up. Go ahead and install the retaining clips for the GPU and CPU, and then put the Xbox back together. And to finish things up, place the included sticker on the bottom of the console, which indicates that this Xbox has been modified with the HD Plus HDMI mod. And that's how I celebrated the Xbox's 20th anniversary. I have to say that I am really loving the Xbox. I was more of a PlayStation 2 fan back in the day, but I'm really enjoying some of the titles that I missed out on. Having the ability to simply plug in the console into any HD television is both convenient and just really awesome. But with that said, this was certainly a challenging project. As with all these types of mods, if you are unsure of your soldering abilities, I highly recommend you seek the help of an experienced modder, such as Red Herring 32, who also happens to be an official installer of this HDMI kit. Alright, let me give you a quick rundown of some of the MakeMHz HD Plus features. Going to the HD Plus menu, the first thing we have here is the video settings. Here you can force the output resolution, adjust the aspect ratio, and set the audio mode. I kept all these settings at their default position, but changed the output resolution to force 720p video output. Going to the advanced settings, here you can adjust the color space, upscaling, and advanced interpolation. I found that most games look very good without adjusting these, so I decided to leave them as is. And the last option is check for updates. I'm assuming that when an update is available, we'll have to download it onto our computer and then FTP it over to the console. So as you can see, the menu is pretty simple, which isn't an issue at all, because most importantly, the games look absolutely fantastic out of the box, which is really all that matters. Now, there are of course a ton of features that come with the fact that I modded this Xbox with a custom BIOS, mod chip, and custom dashboard, such as being able to rip your games directly to your hard drive, and also being able to play games directly from your hard drive. There are too many features to cover in terms of capability that would make this video just way too long, so I'll save that for another time. And lastly, the fan is whisper quiet. I think the combination of new high quality thermal paste along with the fan upgrade will keep this Xbox running nice and cool. So overall, really awesome capability, and I'm just super excited to experience all the Xbox has to offer. Okay, now that we're familiar with all the features, let's quickly go over the pros and cons. Starting with the pros, first and foremost, the picture quality is just incredible, especially with games that run natively at 720p, such as Amped 2 and Soul Calibur 2. I mean, just look at these visuals. They're stunning, and it's really just amazing how crisp the image quality is, especially when you consider how long ago these games were released. It's really impressive that these games ran natively in high definition back in the day. Truly remarkable. Having played the console before the HDMI mod using the composite cable, the difference is simply night and day, as you can see by the screenshots here. Another really nice thing is that this is a no-cut mod, which is fantastic. The 3D printed HDMI shroud really makes this mod look factory, and I just love that. Overall, with the exception of the flex ribbon cable, all of these mods were fairly simple to install. The fan and SSD mod in particular didn't require any soldering or special tools. And the OpenXenium Mod Chip was fairly straightforward, even though it does require some soldering. The most difficult soldering job was of course the flex cable, however I firmly believe almost anyone could do the hard drive, fan, and mod chip on their own with just a bit of soldering experience. So where things got difficult for me were the software aspects of the mod, which actually brings me to the cons. Doing things like patching the BIOS, installing the custom dashboard, and prepping the new SSD, for me, those were the most challenging parts of this mod. There are quite a few nuances that if you're not familiar with the Xbox system, you may get tripped up just like I did. I am fairly certain I would have not been able to make this video for you if it wasn't for the incredible help that I got from Red Herring 32. He honestly saved the day and really helped me troubleshoot issues as I came across them, so again I have to give a huge thank you to Red Herring 32. The only other con in my opinion is that there is a strange graphical glitch on the top of the screen which you can actually see here. From what I understand, this is completely normal and will be addressed in the next firmware update, which we should be seeing very soon. And really, I think the Xbox is just an amazing console. I'm super thrilled to be able to experience the system, and I can't think of a better way to celebrate 20 years since its release than playing a few games from its amazing library. Anyway guys, that about does it for this video. I'm really enjoying this freshly modded Xbox, and finally playing some of the incredible titles the console has to offer. If you have any questions about any of the mods I did on this Xbox, let me know down below in the comments and I'll do my best to answer them. And if you enjoyed this video, do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps me and the channel out. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one. Until then, see you all next Thursday.